Alright guys, welcome to the final lecture on writing for orchestral forces. We're going to take this lecture a little bit differently this time. We'll be listening through each track separately as a whole rather than going through each section at a time. And then we'll go through each bit separately, looking at it in detail, mainly through the important parts. And because this is trailer music, I'll be throwing in some sound design hits, booms and brahms too, because we want as big a sound as possible. In our later module, we'll be looking at hybrid music and its sound design sections in more detail. We're starting off real simple, booms and big hybrid drum swell to finish off the intro. I like to save the percussion beds and massive hits for later on in a track. The intro is good to focus on orchestra and other synth pads you might have going on. That said, you can always start with rhythm, just keep it simple and low in dynamics. In this mid section though, we're starting to build up the pulse a bit more. A good thing here to add would be a synth pulse with some sort of percussiveness to it. Again, we're covering that in a later lecture. The cymbals and tam-tam are good ways to add a gentle airiness to the track here. And then we finish off the track with that drum rhythm crescendo. The second part of the midsection is where the intensity really picks up. But remember, we're starting halfway through it because the first 4 bars of that part will be roughly the same as the first half of the midsection. I've brought in more cymbals and gong hits and more sound design hits here. The taiko rhythm is busier now, and I've dragged the velocity up a little bit more for a bigger, louder hits from them. Hits are playing every 2 bars along with the cymbals because they're slightly different to the percussive rhythm. We want hits to be somewhat sparse throughout most sections of our piece, as they're going to be the main edit points for the sounds, so use them in moderation. The percussive rhythms like the taiko are fine as they are because they're keeping the rhythmic pulse going. And then we get to the back end where we want to go all out. The first part of the back end is more or less the same as the second half of the back end, but with a lot less going on. We still want this part of it to be building up, but we also want to leave a little more room for that extra push during the return of the theme and the end of this section. I'm using the big hits and cymbals sparsely in this, once every 4 bars usually now, until the last part of it where there's about a 2-bar gap because I want to pack the hits close together. This is the end, this is where we want the intensity. For my cymbals, I like to add some gritty air sounds to them. For this, I used the decapitator. Any sort of punishing distortion should do the trick though. Try and avoid the low end on cymbals, you want to EQ them out so we can leave room for the things that require low end more, like the hits. Overall with this uplifting track, I've gone for a half-time feel. So big hits on beats 1 and higher frequency snare hits on beats 3 with a quick whoosh into them every now and then. Just listen out for that rhythm as I play you the second part of the uplifting section. I have different patches doubling for that snare sound. One example is the SF Multi 1, and another is the instinct hits down here. I quite like the instinct hits because they're really punchy, which is perfect for hits. I have 3 multis with different strike force patches in them. SF Multi 1, as I said, helps with the high snare sounds. SF Multi 2 is for the bigger, punchier hits. I've pitched some of these samples down, added a punchy compressor and a transient modulator for super punch. And then the third one is just an explosive sound which doubles the main hits. The SFTM design hits are the whooshes for the snare. The short ones are just an extra bit of sizzle on the top of it. Most of all though, we're just layering the hits on top of each other, bringing out the best of each one to make one super hit, depending on their characteristics. Try not to do too many big whooshes in your track, as they can get tiring, and they're better used to swell into a section, or out of a section, or halfway through a section. I might be a little bit guilty of overdoing them in this track, but I think it works well. The most important hits are sticking out, and I'm happy with that. Make sure you finish off the back end section with one last massive hit at the end to finish off your track in style. So that about covers the important parts of this track. Let's check out the next one. For the purpose of this lecture, I am using the same sounds for the dark track as I am the uplifting. So similarly to the uplifting, I'm starting with a boom, but I've also got some Brahms in there as well. I consider Brahms as an important part of any track, especially the darker hybrid ones, so I'm using them here just to showcase them a little bit more in a supportive way, rather than as like for an edit point. The second half of the intro, we're building up more. The hits are bigger sooner than they were in the uplifting one, but they're still quite sparse, so there's plenty of time to build them up. In the midsection, we layer the hits up a little bit more, but I keep them sparse still. So we still want to leave room for sound design or other interesting synth leads, which aren't in this example, but they'll be covered in later lectures. We're still adding more layers to the midsection further on. This takes us into the transition between the midsection into the back end. It's important not to add too many high-end sounds because it does tire the ears out. But equally, with the correct amount of usage, it really brings the track to life and adds a real good amount of excitement to it. As you can see, I've only got cymbals playing once every 4 bars, apart from the end where they're playing a few times within the space of 2 bars, which is fine because remember, like we did with the uplifting, we're at the end and we want to really amp it up a bit. So with the second part of the back end, there's a new percussive bed in the taiko ensemble. I've also added a noise pulse to accentuate the rhythm a bit more. Again, the noise pulse is really pushing the high frequencies up, so I'm only using it for this section of the track. Just before that though, in the first back end section, I've also added a noise wave. Let me just show you what that sounds like. On its own, it's not great, but within the mix, like I said, it adds that exciting high-end tension and airiness. But its main purpose for me here is that it's preparing us for the end of the track, which we're bringing out all the frequencies a lot more. So to round things off, as with all things trailery, start small, get bigger and gradually. Things that are great for power in the mix include cymbals, gongs and whoosh hits, but remember not to overuse them. Compressors and other punchy sounds are your friends. Drums work really well with booms and hits, but again, don't overuse them. Keep massive and high-end sounds for really special big moments, such as the beginning of a new section or the end of the track. The main thing to think about overall, though, when writing everything, is layering and doubling. Bass, strings, choir, they're all doing similar things. They're taking care of the melody and the chords, but I'm using each instrument to its personal strengths. For example, the low instruments are playing the bass line, powerful ones playing the melodies in the late, mid to back sections. So that's all for this set of lectures. I hope you've enjoyed it and I hope you can take something away from them. See you in the next lecture.